Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining our Precision Pharma panel today. I'm looking forward to a terrific conversation around the exciting developments happening in this space. Some quick logistics. We'll be starting with a moderated panel discussion and then move into a Q&A. So as you come up with any questions throughout the conversation, feel free to leave them in the Q&A chat, and we'll do our best to address those towards the end of the hour. With that, it's with great pleasure that I introduce our esteemed moderator for this panel, Dr. Dan Geschwind, the perfect person to guide our conversation around cutting-edge developments happening in precision medicine. Dr. Geschwind is a distinguished professor at UCLA and on the faculty of 3 departments in the School of Medicine: neurology, psychiatry, and the human genetics departments. He has won many awards for his research and is a member of the National Academy of Medicine. He is a director of UCLA's Institute Precision Health, and he's a senior associate dean and associate vice chancellor of Precision Health, where he oversees campus precision health initiatives. In his research, he's pioneered the application of systems biology to neurologic and psychiatric disease, meaning that his lab combines methodological approaches from genetics, bioinformatics, cell biology, and medicine to get a more complete understanding of brain function and disease pathways. The goal of his research is to develop new precision health treatments using our understanding of disease mechanisms to develop more effective therapeutics. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Dr. Geschwind.
Well, thanks so much, Natalie. First of all, I want to thank you for your work and for your organization of this panel during this day focused on precision health. And I want to welcome all the attendees to the panel. And as well as I'm really grateful to the panelists as well, who I'll introduce in a bit, but I'll just say their names at first. Amit Agrawal, who is the Global Senior Vice President of Precision Medicine at Novartis, Frankie Daly, who's the Vice President and head of the epilepsy part of the franchise at Praxis, Jonathan Wu, who's Director of Pipeline and Business Development at Cytomix, and Reina Sumiyoshi, who's the pipeline lead at Genentech. You'll get to know them fairly well, hopefully, in a second. I was tasked with just introducing precision health very briefly. I know it's been a whole day event here. I'll just give you my perspective for 2 minutes so that then we can get to hear the panelists' thoughts on this. Precision health is really a paradigm shift. It's a revolution in medicine. It's unlike anything that any of us have seen in our lifetime, unless you're close to 100, where you were alive during the advent of antibiotics. I would say it's most similar to germ theory, the notion of germ theory and the advent of antibiotics. And the revolution is fueled by advances in genomics and genetics, as well as computer and data science. We're going to have whole genome sequence, all kinds of other genomic information, millions of people. We have the ability to analyze these data and to combine them with really broad swaths of clinical data. The notion of precision health can be kind of encapsulated in many different ways. I just saw a very funny insurance commercial that kind of reminded me of this, but the 4 Ps: predictive of risk, in other words, prediction; personalized to the genetic and biological makeup of a person; preventative, in that we can hopefully, with prediction, we can prevent and intervene early to prevent disease, as well as to avoid adverse outcomes from the wrong treatments, et cetera. And lastly, participatory involvement of the patient, care team, as well as our community, because it really is going to take a village to move into this new era. It's really, what I'll say is part of what's been happening is the advent of what we call genetics first in medical care, which you'll probably hear a little bit about. I'll end by saying that at UCLA, we've made a commitment to lead in this area. We've developed the most diverse biobank in the nation in record time. That means a biobank where clinical data is coupled to genetic information in 150,000 patients just to start with, and we're already halfway there, just in a few years. We're the umbrella for many activities: mobile and electronic health in the Center for Smart Health, the California Center for Rare Disease, which is a leader in genetic diagnosis, and one of the first places in the world to be doing whole exome sequencing as a clinical diagnostic more than 10 years ago. We're pushing biotechnology by developing a CRISPR engineering core and we're building a center for genomic medicine. We have many private industry collaborations, including sequencing our biobank with Regeneron. So I want to thank our panelists for joining us. If you'd like any more information on the Precision Health, you can go to our website. But now I'm going to introduce our panelists briefly and then go into our discussion. So as I mentioned, Jonathan Wu is the head of pipeline strategy and product planning at Cytomix Therapeutics. It's a biotech company focused on precision-based medicine for the treatment of cancer. Previously, he was at BeiGene and before that at Amgen in the oncology business unit. And he holds a bachelor's in molecular cell biology from BU. Welcome, Jonathan. Reina Sumiyoshi currently works on developing treatments for patients with breast and gynecologic cancers as the portfolio lead within the portfolio strategy and execution team at Genentech Roche. She's also contributed to the development of novel therapies for hepatitis B at Assembly Biosciences. And Reina holds a BA in human biology from Stanford and an MBA from our own Anderson School. Amit Agrawal is currently the global head of precision medicine for Novartis. He joined Novartis from Amgen, where he was head of corporate strategy. Prior to Amgen, he was at McKinsey. He has a bachelor's and master's degree in chemistry and a biomedical engineering PhD from Georgia Tech, followed by a postdoc from MIT, where he worked on nucleic acid therapeutics. And Frankie Daly currently serves as the vice president and head of epilepsy at Praxis Precision Medicines. Prior to Praxis, Frankie was at Moderna, where he served as associate director of business development and corporate strategy. His undergraduate degree is in chemistry from Dickinson College, and he has a combined MBA, MS in accounting from Northeastern. I hope I got that all right. So to start off, I'm going to ask a few questions, and then we'll also be looking. I'll be looking through the Zoom to find some questions from the audience. But I want to kick it off first. First, I'd like to know how you define precision medicine, and maybe I'll start with Amit, who's the global head at Novartis, and see if I got it right.
Thank you, Dr. Geschwind. You absolutely did. I think perhaps to add on to what you said and follow some of the regulatory language we have seen from authorities, right medicine for the right patient at the right time, sort of captures the spirit of where precision medicine teams across the stakeholder groups, across the companies want to go. So, to get to the definition of what is right through the discovery, development, launch, and commercialization of medicine, a lot of molecular signatures, genetic data, as well as patient-specific information and environmental information needs to come together to define what is right patient, to define what is the right treatment, in that you can demonstrate safety and efficacy in the right patient population or at the right individual patient level. And then being able to demonstrate that we can administer that medicine, deliver that medicine at the right time for the individual patient. That remains the goal of precision medicine at Novartis and at, I believe, majority of the companies and stakeholders. So I'll pause there and perhaps invite others to comment as well. That captures pretty well for me, in addition to what you mentioned, the spirit of precision medicine that we try to adhere to or pursue.
Reina, how about you? What do you, does what we're saying ring true with you? Do you have anything to add, especially because you're focusing work in oncology, which is really one of the frontiers?
Yeah, it definitely rings true. Right treatment, right patient, right time, right? That's certainly what we at Genentech and Roche also think about in terms of precision medicine and precision oncology. I do think the definition of precision oncology is changing over time, right? As diagnostics and as the tools that we have available to us has evolved over time, right? Starting with things like immunohistochemistry in the beginning, and now we've got diagnostic tools that can tell us about circulating tumor DNA and other things. And so even what we define as precision medicine really is changing over time. And as you alluded to, I think it is a very exciting time where there are still constantly new tools and new medicines coming out.
Thank you. And maybe I'll expand this a little bit to ask a question, but feel free to go back to the last question too. Maybe I'll start with Jonathan and then we'll go to Frankie. How does development of drug development in precision medicine differ from traditional processes from your perspective?
It's quite a loaded question, Dr. Geschwind. I think, as you know, things have changed drastically over time. I'll answer this in a few stages. It's a good question. And I think the first is kind of prefacing, as we've all been talking about, the definition of precision medicine, the right patient, the right medicine at the right time. And to your point, Dr. Geschwind, genetics first. I think basically we're seeing a whole entire advent, and I can only speak from the oncology side, having been here for over 10 years in oncology, over a decade, in terms of seeing how things have changed in oncology development, to really comment on this. And I think the first and foremost, facet we have to think about in drug development, at least in oncology, and what's changed is really having the end in mind, right? And that's really starting with, as you pointed out, the genetics first approach. So when we're thinking about targets, when we're thinking about different modalities to approach in terms of developing our therapeutics, we always have the end in mind. And what I mean is 3 different buckets that go within that. One is definitely using that genetics first approach in terms of how we develop our medicine. Now there's a plethora of databases available, such as TCGA, such as your own that you're working on in terms of UCLA, Dr. Geschwind, to really scrutinize the different genomic aberrations or different targets we can pursue in terms of oncology development. The second one is pairing this with really the patient at the end, right? We have to understand, who is this medicine for? What type of patient are we after? Is it a particular, what's the real unmet need? Now there's thousands of clinical trials out there. Are we targeting this medicine for the right patient at the right time in terms of how we think about development in each line of therapy? And then that trickles down into your actual questions in terms of how does this change development? Well, I think in terms of, at least in oncology, gone are really the days of your traditional phase 1 in terms of safety explorations to phase 2 dose escalation to a phase 3 efficacy evaluation. I think a lot in terms of at least the small biotech community, people are really looking at the phase 1s to hit the ground running, to define not just safety, but the efficacy of a product as well. So you really have to have the end goal in mind. You're right as soon as you're administering your therapeutic in the first patient. And that, I think, has fundamentally changed how we develop our medicine. For example, nowadays, as Rainey pointed out, where we can implement all sorts of predictive biomarkers to even target the right patient, such as a particular tumor type expression, T-cell abundance, immunoPET imaging, right? Baseline blood samples, all the way to paired biopsies when we think about solid tumors specifically, pre and post-dose blood samples, pre and post-dose paired biopsies to really understand how our medicine is working in a patient, right? Release cytokine release kinetics, immune cell abundance in oncology, and then, of course, understanding the circular ctDNA as well to understand tumor burden and how our medicine is actively changing the tumor environment in patients. I know that was quite oncology-centric.
Sure.
Would love your thoughts, Frankie, on this as well, but
let me just...
these are tools that weren't available previously.
Thank you, Jonathan. Before I get to Frankie, I want to maybe expand on one thing just briefly. And again, anybody can chime in on this. Everybody keeps saying right patient, right time, right treatment. But what that does is and what you just described, Jonathan, appropriately limits the population, the indication. And there's an interesting tension there, right, between market size and the market-driven forces and this. How do you view that? And how do you personally, or how does Cytomix think about this? Maybe you can't speak for Cytomix, but at least from your perspective.
Absolutely. It's a fantastic question, right? In terms of what's the economic, always thinking about the economic upside in terms of developing your medicines as well. And as you pointed out, as we're slicing and dicing and narrowing our populations, how do we really think about this? Well, I'd say the first thing in terms of the regulatory environment that's favorable is really accelerated approval pathway. And that's where I started out in saying how are medicines evaluated, right? In terms of getting onto the market quicker, that plays a big role in terms of how we think about developing our medicines and the potential economics associated with that. And for a company, and what I actually like about small biotech and even medium biotech is sometimes we will take on developed medicines in which large companies may not. And I don't want to, disparage colleagues in big companies, but we also do have, it is a reality in terms of drug development to think about. So there's the good part is that our ecosystem is quite robust, and there's all sorts of different companies and different company sizes, and everyone thinks a little bit differently about development and what constitutes the market and what's appropriate.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm going to let Frankie weigh in, and then Amit, I'll let you, maybe you have something to say on that question.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jonathan and Dan. So, we Praxis is a clinical stage CNS biotech that's leveraging the genetics of epilepsy to build a pipeline of precision medicines, not only in epilepsy, but broader movement disorders. And, in many of these rare epilepsies that I'll talk about as an example now, like the unmet need is really what dictates where we go first. Imagine hearing a mother of one of these kids with SCN2A gain of function, rare pediatric epilepsy tell you that there are some days when she wonders if her son would be better off not living. Like the unmet need is extraordinary. And I think it's challenging for people who've not interacted with these communities to grasp this. And we're not building drugs that provide marginal improvement here or there, such as improvement in headaches for a few hours. We're building precision medicines that can modify the underlying course of disease and truly change lives. But to that effect, right, like every additional day it takes us to get our drug approved is a day that these kids and their caregivers are waiting. So every day matters, every hour matters. So we're constantly looking for ways to develop our drugs more efficiently. And so we've assembled an ecosystem of specialist partners to help us reduce timelines and costs, especially for rare disease drug development, which is, some of the populations that you're alluding to, Dr. Geschwind.
So how do you, can you expand on that a little bit? I'm very interested in that, being a neurologist, and one of my other hats is I direct the autism center here. And so it's SCN2A being a major, most common causes of autism, as a rare causes, common rare cause of autism.
Yeah, sure, Dr. Geschwind. So within the lens of, access, or just within the lens of how we think about developing precision medicine?
About accelerating. I mean, I think one of the real advantages here, I think a number of you will speak to, is the fact that even though it might be a smaller population, that, and I think Jonathan highlighted this, the pathway is shorter and can be accelerated substantially because of for a lot of reasons. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And you had mentioned that you have assembled a kind of, I don't want to paraphrase, but like a pipeline for acceleration. It would be great to hear what the key components of that pipeline are from your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So the four key principles or components for us that really guide new targets and how we discover and develop drugs are the genetics. The translational tools, the efficient path to clinical proof of concept, and then the patient need and how that need translates to patient-guided development paths. So, from our perspective, Dr. Geschwind, there have been many advancements in the understanding of genetics, but there's an outsized understanding of epilepsy genetics relative to all other CNS and non-CNS diseases. And this is key for us because we use genetics as a way to select new disease targets with high probability of success. Our industry operates on a 10% probability of success rate. But if you understand the genetic mutation causing the disease, then you can understand what needs to be fixed to affect the underlying disease biology, right? And then once we have our genetic target and understand the causative disease biology, we can then identify the optimal solution set and leverage one of our platforms to deliver a new drug candidate to address it. Another example to guide new programs from discovery into the clinic are translational tools such as predictive animal models, multi-scale disease models, development of biomarkers such as quantitative EEG, endophenotypes, biofluids to guide early clinical development. And again, drive your probability of success that you're taking the right medicine into the right group of patients for the first time. And then the third element of this really is the efficient path to clinical proof of concept. And from our perspective, this relies heavily upon identifying the right patients and the right endpoints, and leveraging genomics and computational tools to stratify patients and understand which patients are most likely to respond and are most appropriate for your medicine, such that the solution can be matched to the need. An example, I think, more specifically about how we do this is, we've partnered with a genetic testing company called Citizen to consolidate and analyze a group of SCN2A patients' electronic medical records and genetic testing data to conduct a retrospective natural history study to significantly reduce the amount of time it would otherwise take us to generate that same natural history study data that would be prospectively generated outside of this space in order for us to take that data package forward and inform our stakeholder set, such as the agency and the communities that we serve. So I'll pause there, but hopefully that provides a high-level overview of how we think about advancing our programs forward.
Amit, I'll give you the floor now, and then we'll go to Reina right after.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Geschwind, and Frankie and Jonathan, fantastic points. I'll just probably try to build on it and see, where the discussion leads to. I'll go back to the definition or the development of precision medicine over last 100 years or so. If you just look at how many diseases were classified as disease, or different disease groups were known to us 100 years ago in ICD, and if you look at the same number today, it's just expanded massively, significantly, from about 200 to, I think, 355,000 plus codes coming up in the ICD-11. And what that is based on is not necessarily a single entity, a single company, and single technology contribution. It's just underlying human curiosity, subdividing diseases into more precise, compartments of diseases against which we can develop drugs, develop testing tools, and develop, solutions, not just medicines. And it's a trend, Dr. Geschwind alluded to, that will continue to develop, and we'll have to, as a community, demonstrate the efficacy, safety, and relevance of our medicines to patients, to regulators, to the payers, and to the providers in that context. And this trend is aided by the advancements in technology of detection and diagnostics, but also by our ability to mine and derive patterns and insights from the data. And it has come through faster and earlier in oncology, followed by perhaps rare diseases, and it will continue to stratify the risk and make them more easily understood in other areas, which, I think there was a question about Lp(a). The areas where the ability to demonstrate specific effect on a patient doesn't exist today will continue to follow through in time to come. That's where I was going with the definition. And if you look at that context and then go to the question you asked, Dr. Geschwind, which is, how do we balance the baggage that comes sometimes with the precision medicine being a difficult place for a medicine to earn returns or succeed commercially? I think there are a few areas where we see success. When you demonstrate a definitive cure for a patient on the back of a precision medicine-driven insight, I think you can demonstrate the cost offsets, the value of the medicine to the society in really delivering a profound innovation that can change and alter a patient's life, but also save healthcare system a significant amount of hassle, as well as the financial economic benefits, and those then can be returned in form of pricing support, in form of value support. The second area I would highlight is, if you have tumor agnostic, mutation driven medicines that you can launch. You are alluding to it, Jonathan, a little bit. I think then you have found a path to expand a certain indication or certain medicine into multiple indication and keep expanding the patient population and offer the same solution tailored in different ways to different patient populations. And that's a very important paradigm emerging. And then third piece is really perhaps around making sure that we do not get caught up in just the molecular innovation and its novelty, but really looking at each patient has unique context and needs in which they need to be supported to access the medicine. Every company, Rihanna, Genentech, every company with commercial product is aware of this need and should be offering significant support in accessing medicines agnostic of their context and the situation they're in. And this develops a cohesive system of responsibility across providers, payers, patients, and companies to provide that access financially. And the reward is, in return, you collect data that can be useful to the patients, can be useful to the providers in understanding how to develop next generation of therapy. So I think there are multiple facets to this problem, and there are places where it succeeds today. In the future, we will be able to demonstrate more precise reduction of risk in certain diseases, and that will pave the way for more cost savings, better pricing support to different diseases where probably precision medicine is not delivering the returns today.
Thank you. Thank you. Reina, please.
And a couple points to build on from the various points that have been raised. So I think one aspect to consider as we talk about access, right, is not only access to the medicines, but access to the diagnostic tools that allow patients to actually then be able to get treated with the right treatment, right? So I think this ties in with the broader theme of partnering across the system to be able to actually allow precision medicine to be accessible to patients and to physicians. Right. So partnering with payers to understand what's the level of evidence that's necessary to be able to get these precision medicines approved and reimbursed. And that's going to differ from region to region, right? The US is a very different market from the EU and rest of the world. You also need to partner with diagnostic companies or with, internal diagnostic partners to be able to develop those companion diagnostics that patients will then have access to, right? There's no point in developing precision medicine if you don't have the right tools that patients then have access to as well. And then I think the other partnership piece when we're talking about reducing costs and accelerating timelines, right, is also partnering with real world data set holders, right? Because real world data, I think this builds on the point that Frankie was talking about, right? Where this is the kind of data that can allow us to not just run prospective studies, but actually go and leverage, this quote unquote big data to understand what are the biomarkers that we're not already aware of that can further inform development of precision medicines. And I think, there's already been a lot of discussion around accelerating timelines, but I think there are also other levers that you can pull within when you're thinking about going after a smaller market size, right? There's risk, there's value, but then on the denominator side, right, you're looking at costs and timelines. So this is where, the faster you can go, and if you can go for accelerated approvals, which are becoming harder, FDA is cracking down on that. Those are different aspects in which you can leverage. And I think also the other point is that taking a disease area focused approach may be a way to enable or to make economical sense of developing precision medicines, right? And what I mean by that is, for example, if you take breast cancer as an example, if you have a portfolio of medicines, say 10 different medicines, each one targeting a different, mutation or fusion or whatever biomarker signature a patient may have, that can help you. You're not going to 10 different customers at that point, right? On the market side, you've got one customer. It's your breast cancer patients and your breast cancer doctors. And if you can say, you take this one test and it'll tell you which of these medicines you can have, right? That can lower, it's thinking about valuation, not from like an individual study or individual medicine point of view, but actually really from a disease area portfolio view. So sorry, those were different thoughts that came up. The different.
No, it's great. I mean, it's really great because, there's obviously a tension there, and you've all mentioned FDA, which is very interesting. And, if you get approved for a very, very narrow indication, patients with a specific genetic disorder, then you have to kind of move out to the others. But it's really great to hear the way that you're addressing that and thinking about it in a kind of multidimensional way, not just in this unidimensional way. There are so many different aspects of this that can actually be an advantage, as you brought up, as all of you brought up, which is really absolutely fantastic to hear. I'd like to hear maybe, Reina, I know you were just, the major areas, and I think Amit mentioned this, are really, from our perspective, from a health system perspective, right now, are cancer and let's call it rare diseases, neurodevelopmental disorders, et cetera, medical genetic, and they're kind of on different footing from a therapeutic standpoint, but maybe starting with oncology, Raina, and then maybe, Jonathan, we can talk about that a little bit. Maybe share a little bit about from your perspective, what are the maybe 2 or 3 most exciting developments in your area of oncology?
Yeah. So many to choose from because, at the end of the day, as you've alluded to, oncology is an area where precision medicine has now been around in one way or another for a couple decades, really started with research that came out of UCLA around HER2 expression in breast cancer, right? A lot of that research started in actually the late 1980s, which then led to the development of Herceptin by Genentech, which was approved by the FDA in 1998, right? So that was really, I would say, like a key starting point of precision medicine and oncology. But if you're talking about what are some of the really exciting medicines in the market today, I would say cell and gene therapies are an area where maybe they're starting to come to market. A lot are still in development. I think we're still trying to figure out how to develop it in a cost-effective way. And there are a lot of challenges there, as well as mitigating some of the safety challenges with some of these therapies. But I think that's one asset class, I would say, that's super exciting.
Maybe I'll refine the question a little bit.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting point. But I guess, my thinking about it is, how has this kind of approach changed, just giving a couple examples, if you can, changed your kind of pipeline thinking, the way that kind of Genentech thinks about approaching and developing cancer drugs. There are many aspects to that. One could be choice of area to pursue, is one of them. The other is, I'll just leave that to you, though. I'm just giving you ideas.
Yeah, in terms of choice of, just disease areas to pursue, at the end of the day, I think like many other companies, what we pursue is transformational outcomes or transformational innovations for patients with high unmet needs, right? So I wouldn't say necessarily we're focused in specific areas. As you can see from our pipeline, we do have a very, very rich oncology pipeline where we are looking across multiple tumor types. I would say some of the ones that you could say, in my opinion, are impressive are things like the PI3 kinase inhibitor, which has gotten a bit of bad press and has a long history there because it has historically been an extremely hard to target gene, but it is one that we are starting to see next generation PI3 kinase inhibitors where the safety profile is actually manageable and where, the PI3 kinase mutations are actually ones that are not only prognostic for poor prognosis, for poor outcomes, but also predictive of benefit from PI3 kinase inhibitors, especially if they're selective to the type of mutation that the patient has. I don't know if I'm still addressing your comment exactly.
No, I think you are. I'd love to hear Jonathan's thought on that as well, since
Absolutely. And to build upon that, Raina made really good points in terms of the advent of oncology and to really break down the history, right? Innovation has been happening in really blocks and chunks of time. And I think we've really only scratched the surface of oncology as you saw the advent of cellular and gene therapies. This is right now currently what's very popular and what's really a lot of companies are looking forward to in terms of really a next block of innovation. But if you look at the history, right, and the advent of oncology research and therapeutics, some of the first immuno-oncology therapeutics to be approved, such as CTLA-4 and then also cytokines, that was an approach that was definitely taken in the beginning, although too toxic, right? And though we have therapeutics like ipilimumab on the market, now we're seeing other companies come in, such as Agenus, with really advancements and enhancements in CTLA-4 that's providing a completely different profile than ipilimumab, even though they target the same target, right, or the same checkpoint in the pathway. Now, that's extremely fascinating. It tells us we're really just at the surface of understanding in terms of oncology. The second, a potentially relevant example, as Raina pointed out, HER2. HER2 is certainly pointed out as identified early as a key driver in terms of breast cancer. However, Now we see the advent of HER2, which has pretty much changed the game and paradigm in terms of breast cancer treatment. And that was very recent. So we've only really scratched the surface of what really tumor expression could really mean, how to interpret that, and developing therapies against it. And to your earlier question, Dr. Geschwind, I think what encouraging signals that we've seen in terms of oncology, and as much as the big strategic companies looking at oncology, is I think there is an understanding that, the space is getting subdivided just because cancer is very heterogeneous. Every patient is different. And we're seeing a lot of investments, I think in the beginning, where you had a lot of feedback trying to go after large spaces. How can we invent the next Keytruda, or how can we invent the next nivolumab? I think a lot of the larger companies are really taking a step thinking the evolution isn't going to be, perhaps not a product as big as Keytruda, but that's okay, because what's important to us at the end of the day is getting these medicines and driving the innovation to the right patient, right? Nobody wants to put, it used to be kind of the mother test, right? Would you want to put your mom on this drug? And I think everyone would agree that they would want to put their mom on a drug that they know is going to work. So for us, we've established 6 partnerships with big companies: Amgen, AbbVie, Astellas, BMS, Regeneron, and most recently Moderna. None so far with Novartis and Genentech. Perhaps we can change that in the future. But we're really seeing these big companies come to the table and really wanting to learn more about precision medicine, what's that next wave in innovation for oncology. So it's very encouraging in our field.
Great. That's great to hear. No, it really is great to hear. We'll get back to some of this in a second, but I want to get back to the brain again. So Frankie, so we heard about oncology and kind of how exciting oncology is and how we are just scratching the surface there. Many, what I hear all the time is brain is hard, cancer's pretty hard too. But it's working, right? There's a roadmap there. I'd love to hear more about your strategy around rare brain diseases, how you came to SCN2A, and kind of how that is typical of your kind of strategy, and how you guys are thinking about that.
Sure, Dr. Geschwind. So we like to say that the neuroscience field, as it relates to the biopharmaceutical space, is about 10 to 15 years behind oncology. And so one of the reasons that we are very excited is because I think that we have just not even started scratching the surface in terms of the impact that we can have on patients with neurological disorders by bringing precision medicines. An example of this is actually our lead program, which is a T-type calcium channel blocker for a disease called essential tremor. Interestingly, pathogenic variants of a specific gene have been associated with epileptic seizures. That gene encodes what's called a T-type calcium channel, which is responsible for control of rhythmic movements. And so what happens is when there's overactivity of the channel, that can lead to movement disorders, such as what's called essential tremor. Now, for those of you not familiar, it impacts about 7 million people in the US, which is about 7 times the prevalence of Parkinson's disease. And because of the shaking and tremor, these patients are unable to dress themselves, eat with utensils, use their phones, keyboards, and they retreat from daily life. It's devastating. And only one drug, a beta blocker, was approved for essential tremor in the 1960s and is plagued by poor efficacy and poor tolerability. So most patients discontinue and move on to other drugs off-label. So that means for 50 years now, patients have dealt with subpar therapeutics built for other diseases that cause them safety issues. Now, we've leveraged an insight around the genetics of epilepsy related to that channel to create a drug that blocks that channel when it's in the hyperexcited state. So our lead drug, ulixacaltamide, blocks the T-type calcium channels to then restore the normal movement disorder to these patients with ET. And last year, we announced positive proof of concept in these patients showing significant functional improvement in addition to the fact that it was well tolerated. And so we now have an ongoing phase 2B study that's on track to read out this quarter. And we're very excited to see the results of that so we can keep advancing this forward to patients. And I highlight this as an example of leveraging genetics to enable precision medicine, not only for rare populations, but also for a massive part of the population.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's great. Yeah, and so it again shows how maybe focusing on a narrow indication then can open things up as well. One of the things that is kind of brought up is this notion of access. Let's call it access. There are many access challenges to some of the precision medicines that have been developed, from kind of gene therapies for rare diseases that are very expensive, and thinking about the financial returns, right, which have to be considered if you're a company developing drugs. I mean, it's been great to hear the way that you guys are focusing and think about the market and all the unmet need out there. It's really brilliant. At the same time, how does one deal with these access challenges? And so maybe, Amit, given your roles that you've had both at Amgen and now at Novartis, I'm really curious, substantively, how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, Dr. Geschwind, thank you. This is a great question, and I think I alluded to this before. The ability to add net value to society is really important to keep in mind as you develop drug, as you launch drug, as you commercialize drugs. And the deeper the curative potential a drug has, it rids a person of entire life's worth of suffering and challenges, as you were just highlighting, Frankie, in case of essential tremors. The more willing the stakeholders are to fund and enable that innovation from their own budgets to really be in patients' hands and to be used. So there is perhaps no substitute for demonstrating adequate value to society, to different stakeholders, to payers, to the providers, to the patients, and to the caregivers. And unless you do that in a very substantive and significant manner, acknowledging their own way of looking at value, not just one person's, one stakeholder's value sort of definition, it's difficult to justify pricing for the any molecule. So I feel the paramount job access and value teams have at the companies is to take an innovation and put it in the context of society and the value to society, get feedback from payers, get feedback from providers, get feedback from patients, and ask, what does this really help you achieve and do? And what is the real cost and value savings or value offset to the society? And if that work is done well, then you find support for the innovation. So that's the first principle. I think the better the work done there on the back of precision medicine, by demonstrating cure, by demonstrating longevity of value that you add to the person's life or quality of life, the better the argument. The second principle is making sure that different contexts of patients and individuals are recognized, and making sure that they have access to the medicine and innovation when there is need. And I was alluding to the access programs. I was alluding to different mechanisms and channels that individuals can afford in order to access the medicine, and making sure that we do not ignore that and pay attention to, in addition to demonstrating value and getting it on the formularies and getting it approved by different payers, there is recognition that context of individual patients, individual situations that cannot be addressed by just one particular plan or one particular approach, and being there to support them, support the patients. That's something most companies do very thoughtfully. I think that's the second one. And third, I would say over time, what I've seen is indication expansions into adjacent indications, into broader indications, have the potential to reduce the price, to reduce the cost of goods, to reduce the ability to sort of sustain the innovation in marketplace. And when that happens, the medicines become more and more affordable as the expansion happens. And this is why precision medicine, enabling early insights into which indications to pursue, where to expand this medicine, how to define populations that can continue to benefit from this, is super critical. And we always start with one indication, but then we ask, where else could we leverage it? Is it a broader population we can bring it to, and thus bring the sort of economics more make the economics more favorable across all indications? These are some of the approaches and considerations. There isn't a single lever, as you just alluded to earlier, but it's very important to keep in mind demonstration of incredible safety and efficacy and cure, demonstration of benefit which offsets the or provides significant value to society, keeping mechanisms in place that make sure that every person who has need for the medicine can avail of it, can actually approach it, and then really innovating behind the lead indication in a sustainable fashion to make it more accessible by sort of harnessing the synergy across different indications. Those are some of the things I have in my portfolio roles and other roles always paid attention to. And when those are present, then that's when you can find a sustainable path to value and access for the right innovation. I'm curious to hear others' thoughts as well.
Yeah, no, I will. I want to interject something as well. Thank you very much. That's incredibly thoughtful and detailed. It's very, very thoughtful. And it in my thinking about, as I was reflecting on what you were saying, I was thinking kind of from my vantage point as somebody who works at a hospital on the west side of Los Angeles in LA County, though, that has a lot of disparity in healthcare, both in terms of access and outcomes. We saw this in COVID. We even saw it in COVID in our own hospital. So, with regard to the effects and the disparities in outcome, people of different ancestries and backgrounds, not just, so there's the socioeconomic and demographic side of things. There's also the genetics as well. But, if we just think about the social determinants of health, when we think about therapies for rare disorders that might cost $1 million or hundreds of thousands of dollars, how do we get those out to the people who are uninsured? Many of the things that you were talking about are ways to get the government and insurers on board and get the population on board. It makes total sense. All of those things really brilliantly weave together to create a tapestry of, you could say, a value, right? Why this is a value for our society, for everybody involved. That doesn't mean it's going to get to people. There's still these disparities. Are there ways that we should be thinking about it? And maybe not even from, from your view, it may not even, I'm not trying to put this on Novartis or any of the companies at all. It's not, but it's a problem that we all, as members of society, kind of share. And I'm wondering if you have a further thought on that particular issue of the disparities in outcome and access that are really, profound.
Yeah, Dr. Geschwind, I can take, first crack at it, and Rihanna, please, jump in, because, Roche probably faces similar opportunities to help patients. I think the disparities in how we develop medicine, how we get, medicines to be developed in the right context, how we enroll and recruit trials, disparities in how we acknowledge rural versus community setting versus urban setting challenges, and ensure that the access to studies, access to medicines are maintained, and the epidemiological diversity of the patients is reflected in the studies, as well as how the treatments are offered. It's a very critical, very important challenge to hold together, right? And I think it requires, again, collective society to work together. For example, from identification of patients, we are, as a medicines company, we really rely on healthcare systems and the data generated from the testing of different patients, and to understand from the investigators, to understand where the patients are, what their needs are. And when these data sets are available, we are able to understand, what kind of populations are adequately represented versus not represented in studies, in the treatment, challenges that we face, or in the access situations. And this, you can imagine, United States is a very rich, data-rich country. If you go to other countries, this problem becomes even more difficult to understand where the patients are, who they are. Do they have information about the medicine? Do they have their physicians who are educated enough and available to actually prescribe and know the medicines exist? And so education, access to information about the patients, where they are, their context, and epidemiological diversity is the first step to improve. I think in absence of that, being able to find that information that you just alluded to exists at the healthcare system level, yes, doesn't really flow back to the medicine provider, to the physicians, to the prescribers, to the patients in a way that there can be support brought to that. So that's first. The second one, as I mentioned earlier, really recognizing the context of each patient and having thoughtfully tailored a program to meet that patient's context, to meet that system's context, is super crucial. In my days at Amgen, I worked with a company to really provide access to rural communities, rural patients, in being able to travel, being able to stay at a hotel, being able to bring their companion along as they receive the cancer care. So there are many bottlenecks, social determinants of health, as you highlighted, that come in the way of a person being able to just simply seek the medicine, even if it is not, at a significantly prohibitive cost. The missed days of work, the travel, the companions, and the job days lost all represent a hurdle. So a long-winded way of saying, data-driven way of accessing where the challenges rise or exist, having specific context-tailored programs to uncover what challenges exist and really addressing them through specific issues or programs that you can match or provide solutions to is the only way to get there, Dr. Geschwind. Some people, despite the access to managed access programs where you can seek medicine for pretty reduced costs or coupons, are not able to travel, are not able to get to the right center. And there are many hurdles I've seen come across in the studies and in marketplace that we need to thoughtfully overcome instead of just looking at one particular lever. And most companies like Roche probably does, and Novartis definitely does, pay attention to this diversity of context and during the studies and during the launch products to be able to provide solutions. Is it perfect? Probably not. And this is where feedback loop from the healthcare systems is super crucial in being able to learn about those disparities and address them adequately.
Thank you. Raina, I'd like to give you a couple minutes. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll go quickly because I know we're running out of time here, but absolutely +1 on Amit's comments around, advancing inclusive research is absolutely important from beginning to end, right? It can't just happen at the end. We need to be thinking about endpoints we can be including that are relevant to maybe looking at patients with different ethnicities, ancestries, et cetera, all the way through ensuring, they're in the clinical trials, et cetera. But on your question around, more philosophically, how do you actually get companies or organizations to develop medicines for something that might be a rare disease and those patients might not have access? I mean, taking off my Genentech Roche hat, right? Just kind of thinking more creatively. I mean, can we think about things about like subscription pricing models, right? I know this is kind of out there for, more of the healthcare pharma industry, but can we think of ways where we're not just thinking about individual patients having to pay for individual molecules or individual medicines, right? Can we think about a way in which we can, I hesitate to use the word subsidize, but enable access for all patients to have access to the medicines that they personally need, right? That's just one thought. That's maybe would be curious about what others think about that. And then similarly to Novartis and any other large company, I mean, obviously we do have things like the Genentech Patient Foundation, which do provide access to existing medicines that we've developed to those who may not otherwise have access.
Sure. I mean, that might be harder for smaller companies, right, that don't have all the products and everything, right, that are relying on their cash flow and investors to get their product, before early on. So, I'm wondering if Jonathan or Frankie have any quick thoughts on that. We have 5 more minutes, so maybe if you could just speak to a minute, and then I'll give you each a little bit of time just to add your finishing thoughts.
Frankie, you want to go first, or?
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Sure. Honestly, having been in commercial for a bit, maybe I really like value-based care, and we had another panel. We can do multiple panels on that. I really like the model, fully understanding we have a long way to go to implement that, right? But two-sided risk, sharing risk, and paying for value, I really like those sorts of health economics or that sort of mechanism. If you look at other countries like Germany or Japan in terms of how they implement their healthcare system, there's a lot of logic to that we could learn from for sure. And I know we don't have a lot of time. I'll end with that, sure. But perhaps it's not if I wore my big pharma Amgen hat, maybe I wouldn't have the same answer, but I think we're getting towards there for sure, especially as we're thinking about medicine developing in the future. But I think there's some sort of a play for value for sure.
Thank you. No, that's great. Frankie, any thoughts?
Yeah, just to reiterate, and I think echo off of several others here, understanding that diversity from day one and embedding it within your clinical and commercial strategy is imperative. Need to understand the need you're solving for, just like any other business. There's demand and there's need, and the needs that we're solving are for patients. And so we need to understand the patients we're delivering solutions for, and then deliver that medicine, right? And so it's imperative for all stakeholders within the ecosystem to have that shared vision of what the value is. And then for the segment for all populations, there will be a segment irrespective of the population with access challenges. So it's imperative to stay aware of this and proactively prepare to roll out access mechanisms to support. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to end and give you guys each a last chance to, there's a great question in the chat that I think is great to end on. And I'm just going to read it quickly. Seems like the private sector has the financial resources, but the public sector might have better reach in terms of patients and data. How can the two sectors collaborate in accelerating development of precision medicine? I'm just going to go around clockwise, starting with Jonathan, to Amit, to Raina, to Frankie, and maybe try to spend under a minute so we can end on time if you can. I know, tough question, private-public partnership.
Yeah, it's something especially that we're evaluating here at CytomX in terms of private and public partnerships. I think there's a lot of, I think part of the challenges, especially as a small company that we face is, a lot of us wear a ton of hats and we're not really sure what resources out there are available to us from the public sector. But it kind of behooves us to be a bit more proactive into learning about this and how can we partner with the public sector, especially as we think about clinical trial development, the diversity requirements coming in with clinical trials, and how can we achieve a better partnership. So I think there's definitely a lot of room for improvement there, but I think the onus is pretty much on both parties to try to reach out to have better efforts for communication in terms of what resources are available to each.
Great. Amit?
Yeah, Dr. Geschwind, I think it's critical and imperative. The COVID situation has clearly revealed that when the collaboration exists, speed and success can be, challenges can be overcome profoundly. The data is collected and, available through public and, healthcare systems, not generated within the real world setting, within the pharma walls. Similarly, great innovation and new novel discoveries find their origin in academic centers. So we strongly believe that this data, collectively looking at it, understanding correlations, listening to partnering with KOLs and collaborators to uncover drivers of disease, to uncover novel patient populations that could benefit, working on these hypotheses together is crucial to advancing and bringing the promise of precision medicine, reducing the risk, accelerating the timelines across the board. And I think what is missing in my perspective is there are many small companies, startups, and large companies starting to create these silos of data sets. Large healthcare systems are also creating their own data sets. How do we really merge and collectively harness the power of this? It requires some standardization, some authority to come in and together and provide translatability, interconnectedness across these data sets. Unless that happens, we will not expand the power of data beyond a single entity's desire to mine it, to monetize it. And that's what we all should be really joining forces to enable.
That's a really great point. Raina?
Right. Building on that, I think partnerships on both ends, right? And partnerships with the academia and the research powerhouses, as well as partnerships with regulators, payers, cancer institutes, everything, right? The full spectrum partnerships are so critical for us to be able to continue to develop precision medicine and really any medicines overall. So I think we're making progress. There's still room for improvement there. I think the other challenge is definitely going to be data privacy laws, right? And that's where we got to work around. We want single sources of full sets of data, but working with regulators and such to ensure that privacy of patients is protected while being able to have these single sources of data. It's going to be a challenge and opportunity for the future.
Great point. Frankie, we'll let you have the last word, and then...
So I think all of us on this, here today would admit that we would be naive to think that all great science and advancements come from within the four walls of our respective companies, right? The power comes from the collaboration between privates, private and public, and publics and publics. But in the ecosystem of partners that expand reach and insights, this comes in the form of innovative research from public institutions to kickstart new ideas around medicines, data generated from the data from patients coming into the healthcare ecosystem, and then furthermore, clinical trial execution and being a part of the development of these medicines forward in a collaborative fashion.
Yeah, no, I really like that. I think all four of you together have kind of outlined, through your answer, really the major challenges and what we really need to do, both all the way from data sharing and pulling it together and really partnering and all the challenges around that, the privacy laws, et cetera. So I thank you really for very thoughtful panels, super interesting. I really enjoyed this discussion. I really want to thank you very much. And I want to thank Natalie for organizing it. Really, really terrific. I look forward to further engagements and discussions around all of these issues with all of you. So thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much.